Hi, thanks for joining our session. My name is David Wilbur. I'm the managing member of Vetergy Group, LLC. We're based in Birmingham, Alabama. I wasn't always with Vetergy. I served for more than 20 years as a pilot and a leader in the United States Marine Corps. I have some lessons from that I want to share with you today. Our topic is human factors, and this notion of admitting human error in our organization is somehow going to help us get a paradigm shift in the way we look at human factors in our operations. I hope that today I'm going to share with you 3 philosophies that will give you a better understanding of human factors. I hope that you'll write them down. I hope that you'll take them back to your operation and reflect on the things that you see in your operation and help you understand that better. What is human factors? Simply put, human factors is the human and social capital and influences on organizational outcome in our operation. Human factors have been around as long as human beings have been around, for that matter. As far back as World War II, we began studying those in the naval and military aviation community. They became unsatisfied by continuing to blame pilots and blame maintenance technicians for errors that were occurring and want to get deeper into understanding what is human factors and those influences in our operation. And you can see when you think about this industry, naval aviation, commercial aviation, the amazing amount of reliability and safety that they've been able to achieve. But why now? Why human factors now? Why is it now more important than ever? Well, academics and research and theory would suggest that more than 80% of incidents and accidents that occur in our workplace are attributable to human factors. I would attribute that to closer to 100% because there's always someone that is either designed, built, installed, maintained, and operated that piece of equipment so that we can find the human fingerprint on just about everything that happens inside of our operation. It's the #1 predictor of incidents and accidents and failures inside of our operations, which is that leadership and that human component of our operation. It's expensive. In our country today, we spend nearly $2 billion a year addressing workplace accidents and injuries that are primarily a result of human decision making in the operation. It's abstract. We need a deliberate method, a systematic approach towards understanding human factors so that we can improve that in our operation. And most importantly to me today, it's untapped potential. We've worked hard on assets, we've worked hard on process, we've worked hard on technology, and the more and more we improve that, the more we identify and expose the gap between human factors in our operation. As data becomes more and more available in an analytic and digitization environment, understand it's actually moving us further and further away from understanding human factors in our operation. Theory is one thing, application in the real world is another. And I want to share through a case study today with you the practical nature of human factors in your operation. In 2015, a client of ours, a chemical manufacturer in the southeast portion of the United States, was during routine operations had to isolate a pump for maintenance. Lockout tagout was installed, the pump had been repaired, and it was time to return to service. 2 operators were brought in to remove the energy isolation procedure, and they removed the energy isolation. They signed off 9 locks and tags, 5 locks, 4 tags, and the line was returned to service. About a shift later, a supervisor was walking out of the plant and noticed material on the ground, product on the ground. He went closer to investigate what was going on, and he saw a valve open and a tag connected to that valve. Clearly, the operators had not followed the procedure. Clearly, a valve had been left open and the tag was still there. Cut and dry, easy to understand, a mistake, an error in the operation. As we understand more about human factors in our session today, I hope you'll see the story is much deeper than a simple error of an operator. To begin with, in understanding our human factors, when we think about highly reliable, complex, human-dominated systems, we think in 3 primary dimensions. That's the assets, the process, and the people. We focus most of our attention on the assets and the process. Why? Well, they follow the laws of science. They're measurable, they're predictable, they're engineerable to do the things that we expect them to do. However, the human component doesn't necessarily always follow the laws of science. In fact, it deals in much more abstract, much more rhetorical side of the capability of the human mind. But by accessing and improving each one of these domains, we can achieve what we're after, which is at the center of this Venn diagram, is that systemic reliability, where we have people operating reliable equipment within a guidance of process to achieve first time, right time performance, safe and reliable for our operations. So I want to share with you these three philosophies that I hope you will write down, I hope you will think about, and I hope they make you become more curious at the end of this session. Number one, we have to view error as a system product. It's not a cause, it's a symptom of the incident that we have just observed. It's a symptom to dig deeper inside of our operating system to understand what caused that decision to make sense at the time to that operator and the influences to give us opportunity to learn and improve. There's a myth out there that well-trained, highly experienced people don't make mistakes. That's simply not true. They make mistakes all the time. But those mistakes are recognized and accounted for before they become an incident or an accident. And we do this by studying this systemic cause of human factors by looking at what we call the minimum unit of analysis for human factors, the operational juncture. And the operational juncture simply looks at where decisions are made and actions are taken and what the systemic influences that led to that decision and action were. And we break it into four primary domains. That's the people themselves. Are they fit for duty? Are they psychologically fit? Are they trained and are they available and aware in the work that they're doing? Next, we look at the task. Was the information provided? Was the tasking clear? Was the environment that they were operating influencing their ability to accomplish those tasks? And was the information accurate and available to them to understand what needed to be done? The next we look at is the leadership or the supervision. The leadership is not just the front line or the supervision of the work that's being performed, but also the organization's capacity to lead itself, the entire community of leadership in the organization and how that influences the outcome. And then the organization itself, the culture, the management systems, and those influences that frame the mindset of the people inside of the organization. And as we back away from that very granular unit of measure, we see that operational junctures interact throughout time and throughout space in the organization, and from that, organizational behavior emerges and opportunities to learn. What I mean by that is if we see an outcome that is not what we're after, it doesn't even have to be an incident or accident, it could just be an unintended result. If we step into that decision that's being made, with an understanding that it was a well-intentioned decision and understand why that decision made sense at the time, and we trace that back through the influences of other decisions and junctures within the organization, gives us a rich opportunity to learn and improve the organization. There's another myth that would suggest that it's really at that front line where operators make errors that have an outcome or an impact on our operation. The truth is, decisions and errors are made throughout the organization, and by studying all of those through a network of understanding, we can really improve the reliability and safety of our operation. Next, it's not just reliability that we're trying to achieve, but it's resilience that we should try to achieve. What I mean by resilience is that we accept the fact that there is no such thing as a perfect system. We describe that by saying we can spend our time focused on reliability and only get ourselves about 99% of the way there. There's 1%, a tenth of a percent, a hundredth of a percent that will always be remaining no matter how hard we try. And secondly, 100% of the time, something in that remaining 1% is going to happen. Now what that means is we just need to be equally adept at dealing when an incident, when an error has occurred in the operation to stop it and recover from that in a way to maintain safe and reliable operations. When you think about resilience, we design a system to operate at a certain level of performance. It operates. That 1% occurs, an error occurs, and then how we respond to that error is going to decide whether or not it becomes an incident and impacts our operations. We can either respond with ductile or even collapsing, but a robust response will bring us back to where we were. With a human ability to discover and improvise, we can actually use that error not as a liability to the organization, but an asset for improving and adapting our operation over time. The question is, how do we do that? And then finally, we need to understand that this resilience and this human factors rests on a solid framework of leadership within the organization. Enlightened leadership that understands the human influences in our operation and seeks with curiosity to understand and improve human factors in the operation. Now let's go back to our example. Cut and dry. The operators didn't follow the procedure. The operators left a tag, left a valve open, and it caused product to escape from containment. Not what we're after. The volume of material that came out was high enough such that it required an incident investigation. They did the incident investigation, and it was clear, cut and dry, again, the operators failed to follow procedure. As we dig through this human factors understanding and analysis of this incident, I think we're going to see there's much more at play than simple misbehavior of these operators. So let's go take a look. To begin with, if we use a very simple analysis or a 5 why analysis of this incident, we see that there was a chemical spill. First why? Loss of containment. Why? The valve was left open. Why? The EIP had not been removed. Why? The operators miscommunicated. And the last why, the operators didn't follow the procedure. I think we're going to find there's at least another why, a 6th why that's involved here. We add the systemic approach of root cause analysis, and through this method we look for the conditions that existed to allow for these actions to even occur. Adds another dimension of understanding. Why was there loss of containment? Well, there had to be product in the tank at the time, and there had to be a delayed recognition. Had it not been an entire shift later that this valve left open had been recognized, then the loss of material would have been small enough that we would have never even known it or accounted for it. The valve was left open. Well, the valve is in the EIP procedure itself. The valve is installed on the line. The tag wasn't removed. Well, the tag had to be installed as a part of the procedure. And the maintenance had been completed that called for the removal of that tag. The miscommunication between the operators, well, that means there were 2 operators that were involved, and that sign-off between those 2 operators was required. And then finally, not following the procedure. Well, the procedure itself existed, but also the maintenance was required on this pump. Why that becomes important and helps us as organizational designers is it broadens our understanding of incident causation to what's called root causes, and it gives us an opportunity to apply some more meaningful solutions. In this case, if we don't have material in the tank when the line was put back in service, we wouldn't have loss of containment. The EIP, if we take a look at why this valve is in the procedure itself, perhaps there's an opportunity to stop this from happening again. And finally, the fact that these valves have continued to fail, or why this valve failed, may stop us from having to maintain the pump and install this procedure and leave the valve open. Opportunities to learn and stop this incident from happening again. However, at the end of the day, we're still left with this operator that didn't follow the procedure. My question for you is, what would your organization do here? What would you do with this operator that failed to follow the procedure, left a valve open, and led to an incident, and put the site and the organization at risk? What they did is what most of them do, which they disciplined this operator. Ironically, because there were 2 operators involved, they disciplined the one that signed off the procedure, and when they did that, the second operator actually came forward and said, if you're going to discipline him, you need to discipline me as well, because we were working together. But unsatisfying, leaves us with disciplined operators and not necessarily improving the operation as a result of that. What we need, as I mentioned, is because it is abstract, we need a deliberate methodology for understanding this. We talked about the very simple analysis at the surface of problem solving, where we see the impact and the consequences, we address those, and we stop this very incident from happening again. Through a systemic process of root cause analysis, we can dig deeper into those root causes and those conditions that had to exist as well, and open up our understanding of causation and have more meaningful solutions towards those root causes. But if we can get deep down inside of the organization, inside the latent systemic weaknesses that exist in leadership and culture and human behavior, it gives us a very rich opportunity to intervene and assign solutions to improve the operation to become more safe and more reliable. The process for doing it is not much different than the normal process for incident investigation, where it involves data gathering, analysis of the data, recommendation for solutions, and then implementation of those solutions. But in this case, when we're gathering the data, we're looking for more human-related data, more testimonial data that we can understand why the decision was made and why it made sense at the time. From that, we create what's called the action framework, where we identify where those decisions were made and where those actions were taken. And we look for what we call critical junctures, that operational juncture, but a critical juncture is where a decision was made that took us off path from the intended outcome and deviated us away from that. We then apply the operational juncture or the juncture analysis to that, and we apply the taxonomy. The taxonomy is a hierarchy of human factors with definitions through a hierarchy or a structure that allows investigators to follow this taxonomy and understand and dig deeper into that human causation through the domains we talked about: the people, the task, the leadership, and the organization. And we follow those cause paths until they become no longer productive. We've exhausted our capability to understand them any deeper, and now with this taxonomy, we have the opportunity to apply data codes and analyze that data and trend that data over time and look at the organization and make foundational change to improve our operations. So with that, let's go back to our case study that we're looking at here. We have this operator left the tag on, left the valve open, and put the organization at risk. We'll apply the operational juncture to that and do our human factors analysis to understand, again, go deeper into why this happened. To begin with, let's take a look at the people. And I'll add some more information for you to understand as we came back and reinvestigated this using human factors, what we found. Number one, the operators are not even assigned to this unit, to this line that they were maintaining or removing this EIP from at the time. They work in what's called the tank farm, and it's not even part of this production line. They were, at the time that they got the call or the direction to go remove this EIP, they were actually troubleshooting what they thought was a most urgent scenario that was developing, where a SID tank was beginning to overflow because solidified materials was creating a blockage in the line. And if this SID tank volume reaches a certain point, it shuts the entire plant down, which they thought was much more urgent than the installation of this procedure. It was within about an hour of their shift change. The operators themselves were fully trained. They were experienced operators, but not necessarily competent in the line where they were working, and not necessarily familiar with the EIP procedure that they were going to have to go remove. They are familiar with the task of removing EIP or lockout tagout, and in this case they just thought it was routine. So for that reason, they did no planning, they did no pre-job coordination, they did no job safety analysis in order to identify the risk and ensure they understood what it was they were trying to accomplish. They are trusting, they do share good rapport with each other, they've been working together for years. However, the way they organized this, Operator 1 was going to account for the tags and the locks, and Operator 2 was going to sign that off. Operator 2 stated to us that challenging Operator 1 as to whether or not he actually had accounted for that lock and accounted for that tag would have been an insult in the relationship that they had. Then the next part we look at is the task itself, how well they understood the tasking, how well that tasking provided the guidance that they needed to be successful. And what we find is they, again, thought this task was routine in nature and did not require any type of preparation. No pre-job safety, no identification of the risk, no coordination as to who was doing what in the removal of this EIP. No special permit is required. The risks and everything are covered under the procedures. The operators themselves stated that the procedure itself is clearly written. However, it's written by an engineer in the sequence of process flow, not in the sequence of logistically moving throughout along this line in order to remove this procedure. So the operators deviated from that procedure in order to make it make sense for them in the way they maneuver themselves throughout the plant. They did state that they had a checklist that they could take with the field with them, but they were not allowed to bring the procedure itself to be signed off by looking at, physically touching the locks and the tags that were associated with it. It was daytime, it was good weather, there was no rain, it's partly cloudy, and the temperature was no impact on them. And also, and finally, the material itself, mildly corrosive only. No special PPE was required. No PPE was impacting their ability to perform this task. The next thing that we'll look at then is the leadership or the supervision. In interviewing the supervisors, we found out some more interesting information which led to understanding more about this incident. First off, the operators assigned to the tank farm, as we mentioned, they don't have a direct supervisor. As a result of an organizational restructuring that went on, this tank farm was restructured on another area supervisor. And that other area supervisor didn't visit the tank farm very often. He considered them relatively autonomous in the work that they did. They operated independently. They made their own choices. Because of that lack of rapport and lack of relationship with their supervisors, the operators really didn't feel comfortable escalating the concerns that they had. No one is typically prioritizing their work. In this case, they're troubleshooting what they think is an urgent task in the SID tank, and a call comes to remove this EIP. They drop what they're doing and go do it, just taking direction over the radio. The operators felt like it was urgent, this SID tank overflowing, and they felt like that was going to stop production from happening, but they knew that they needed to get this EIP removed so this line could get back off. No one there to help them make the trade decision between what was most important and what they needed to work on. The supervisors, in talking to them, acknowledged that the signing off of other people's work without physically verifying that and confirming that is routine. In fact, it's required. In fact, it's directed by the supervisors because that's how they have to do work. They don't have time to go out into the field with the procedure to ensure that they've complied with the procedure itself. The supervisors, none of the supervisors that we interviewed were aware that the SID tank was overflowing and was going to impact operations. The supervisor himself did not even go coordinate with these operators pre-job coordination. Who was responsible for doing what the risks were, what the expectations were. And finally, by the supervisor's direction, the EIP installation was deemed as critical, but the removal was seen as a lower priority, lower risk task. Just go take the locks and tags off, sign it off, and we can get back to work. The last thing we want to look at then is the organization itself. And when we look and dig and understanding and ask for reflection on the culture and the mindset of the organization, we find that, number one, it's a union facility. This tank farm where these operators were assigned is considered sort of an unpopular assignment, the land of the misfit toys. Junior operators go there as a rite of passage before they move into the plant, left to work autonomously by the supervisor in the role that they provide and the tasks that they're given. Getting the job done is a mindset of this organization. Production, keep producing, had a strong influence on the mindset of these operators at the time. And then finally, the EIP, organizationally designed by the organization, serializes the locks but not the tags, leaving an opportunity for the tags to be omitted because we're not confirming that serialization. So what we see then is, as we go back to this case where we left off with a disciplined operator because we don't know how to make sense out of why they did that, it must have just been their fault, we blow up into this bigger tree now of causal understanding. The fact is there is no, the procedure itself was inadequate because it didn't provide a meaningful sequence for those operators out in the plant. The operators didn't communicate well with each other. Well, they weren't directed on how to communicate and who was responsible for what, and understanding what critical information was critical for them to communicate. Neither one of them were even assigned, nor did they elect to have one of them responsible for the lead to ensure the task was completed successfully. The EIP procedure is not deemed as a critical procedure, it's seen as routine, and so therefore we don't give it much attention. The operators were rushing, they felt the urgency of this SID tank, it was the end of their shift, they needed to make relief, and there was some complacency on their part. As we explode this even further through this juncture analysis into this taxonomy, we see this EIP they're not allowed to, in fact they're directed not to even use the procedure itself in the field. It's accepted and even directed that they will come back to the control room and sign off the locks and tags again without looking at them directly, without the supervisor taking them into the field and ensuring that they've done what they needed to do and they understood what the risks were. And then finally, they were pulled off what they thought was a much higher priority operation or task in keeping the SID tank flowing. No one prioritizing that, no assigned supervisor, and concern out of them to even escalate the fact that they weren't sure what was most important. And as we see, this really falls back into the supervision, the tasking, and the control of work for these operators. And by taking this to the next level of sophistication and understanding around this through this human factors analysis, we see it blows us up into much richer opportunities to improve the operation, to improve the organization by addressing the procedure itself and ensuring it's meaningful to the operators in the field, by building critical thinking skills in these operators into making sure they understood what they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to do it. Supervisors understanding their role in ensuring safe and compliant operation and developing those leaders to do that, and then addressing the culture of the organization, reframing that mindset to understand that balancing risk between production and safety and what the priorities were and what's important. The other important part of human factors, and as we dig deep into understanding, as we just did in this case study, is we find that incidents that are separated by both time and physical geography, either within a plant or other plants, as we dig deep through this understanding of each of these dimensions, that incidents that appear unrelated to each other start to become related to each other and within those organizational weaknesses. As we look at the organization, the supervision, we see that they connect. And what that means to us is that if we can apply interventions, if we can apply solutions at that very deep cultural level and the supervisor level, not only do we stop this incident from happening again, we stop all kinds of other incidents from ever even emerging, improving reliability and safety in the organization. I mentioned that you have a data coding opportunity now with the human factors taxonomy, that as we data code the factors throughout time, we start to get a real understanding of those human factors that are influencing organizational outcomes in your operations. At the end of the day, we end up with a safe, problem-solving, mistake-proofing culture in the organization. We shift from blaming people to blaming the system or being curious about how the system produced this result. We have permission for new conversations with a new vocabulary and expectation that we're going to talk about human factors in our operation and improve them, improving culture, identifying impactful solutions, driving ownership, awareness, and sensitivity to operation into the field, enhancing judgment, interpretation, and improvisation in the field, and becoming mindful about the operation through both formal and informal supporting networks in the operation. So at the end, you see it's not that simple. And that if we can dig deeper beyond errors that occur and understand systemic causes of that, it's going to have a big impact on our operations. 80% of those incidents involve this very fact that we talked about, human factors in our operation. It costs us money and it requires a deliberate process for understanding and improving it. But if we can achieve a high degree of safety and reliability inside of our operations. I hope you've enjoyed it today. I hope as you go back with Curious, you look at your operation and see some of these exact same examples of opportunities to understand error. Thank you.